Yeah, I've had
Okay.
it for years. I kind of need to upgrade.
Yeah. I don't have any mic. I just have my AirPods. I guess that's good enough for now. Okay. Hello, everybody. I think we're live. We're recording. Everything looks set. Um, really excited to do this event with Nader today. By the way, I've been saying Nader, and then people have been saying Nader. Can you once and for all just end this conversation?
Yeah, so it's Nader, but I go by anything that anyone wants to call me that kind of sounds anything close because I understand it's kind of an unusual name. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of unusual name, I'm Guillaume with a hard G. I get angry when people call me something else. So yeah, cool. Now that we have this out of the way, we have an hour today to talk about this new pathway that we're doing at Figment, and I'm super excited to show this with you. And we're gonna do a whole walkthrough with Nader. And so just to start introducing a little bit who we are. Nader, I mean, everybody knows you, but you want to give a quick intro, what you do, who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Nader Dabit. I work with Edge and Node and also Graph Protocol. I'm a developer relations engineer, and I am having the time of my life in Web3.
Yeah, it seems like it. You were working in Web2 before, right?
Yeah, working at AWS for a little over 3 years,
Nice.
and that was also a really great experience. Honestly, keep really good relationships with almost all of the people I work with. Learned a lot and had a lot of good opportunities, and yeah, now I'm here though.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I was a dev in Web2 for almost 10 years, and I switched to Web3. I think a little bit after you. For me, it was 6 months ago, so it's still really recent. But I think I don't have the same Twitter following, but I'm also having the time of my life, honestly. It's just incredibly fun to see the excitement in this community. So yeah, that's really fun. One question, you said you were working for Edge and Node and the Graph. It might not be clear for everybody. What's the relationship between Edge and Node and the Graph and the Graph Foundation?
Yeah, so the Graph was founded around 2017-ish, and they built the Graph protocol over the course of the last few years. They launched a token at the end of 2020, and they turned the Graph protocol over to a foundation called the Graph Foundation. And then the original founders wanted to still work together, so they created a company called Edge and Node, and we do a lot of stuff in the Web3 space, including continuing to support Graph protocol via our team of software engineers. We do Web3 awareness. We're building out some dApps. We're doing some open source stuff. We're doing all kinds of stuff. A little bit of VC.
A little bit of VC. Okay, so that's really interesting because Figment is basically now sort of a sibling organization to Edge and Node, and we're both companies are what we're calling core devs of the Graph Foundation. I mean, that's one thing that Figment does. We do a lot of other stuff, but we have sort of that common interest in building products and tools and indexers and just really building the ecosystem around the Graph Foundation, which is sort of the nonprofit. And then, the other ones are for-profit companies trying to really grow that ecosystem and bring more developers. And so at Figment, we do a bunch of other stuff. We do staking infrastructure, so staking as a service for token holders and investors. And then we have a whole other developer side, and we have Data Hub, which is sort of the way we think about it, or the way we want this to become, is sort of a Heroku for Web3, a way for you to control your whole app, your subgraph, your smart contracts, your your storage. If you want to use Arweave or whatever, we want to really build that central control center for your app, and then learn. And learn is where we sort of again have a lot of common interests, because Web3 is still so early. There's so many developers out there, tens of millions of web developers who don't work on Web3. And so our goal really, and that's where we're here today, is we want to try and convert. And we think of ourselves as evangelists, and we want to convert those Web2 developers to Web3. We want to tell them come, this is the next 15 years of the web, 20, come and work on this as soon as possible, because there's so much stuff to build, right?
Yeah, totally. And there's not a ton of educational material compared to what you've seen in Web 2 space. You Google something around Jamstack, you're going to find literally thousands of articles. But you've seen a lot more content and educational material that has come up over the last 6 months, I think, just from what I can tell, at least. And therefore, lowering the barrier to entry even more, giving an opportunity for more developers to come on board. But the ecosystem is so broad and so vast. There's so much to cover. So like you see a lot of content around certain subjects, but not others. And I think the thing that I like about Figment Learn is that it's very, very broad. You can learn about Solidity, but you can also learn about Avalanche and Solana and all these other things that you don't see a ton of stuff out there. And I am excited about onboarding developers into Web3, but also I'm excited about introducing Web2 developers to Web3 and then letting them continue, like maybe building out those types of ideas within their Web2 companies and ecosystems, because I think that like it's like a gradual type of thing. Like people can go all in on Web3, or they might work at a place like Stripe that's starting to adopt like Web3 concepts and using that term Web3. Just seeing Stripe like say Web3 was pretty interesting yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. Stripe started getting there. I think you see a lot of Web2 companies that are starting to be like inoculated with this Web3 thing, and who are building like crypto teams and who want to start. They basically realizing that like clones are going to appear, which are going to do things like more efficiently, rewarding their communities and just new business models, and they need to start adapting. And the smarter companies are the ones who are now like building crypto teams and start to understand how they can transform using all the ethos and all the tools of Web3. So it doesn't need to be like, let's start everything from scratch. I think there's, even for Web2 developers, there's a ton of opportunities in Web2 legacy, quote unquote, companies to like start building and start like incorporating some of the things like Web3 is bringing. So you've mentioned like Figment Learn. So like, let's start showing to everybody what we've been building. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to just introduce real quick. By the way, I'm on a big screen, so let me know if it's sort of too small, and I'll magnify stuff. Okay. So on learn.figment.io, which is like our educational portal, we sort of gather everything we've been building for all those protocols. We started like almost a year ago now with like Near and Avalanche, and then we added like Polkadot, Celo, and the last ones we just added are the Graph and Ceramic, which are like two we're super excited about, obviously. And so you can, we just added the Graph like this week. We've created a bunch of like resources if you want to get started with the Graph. And then we have the Pathway, which is like our beginner introduction 0 to 1 app. And this is the stuff we're going to demo. And then I'm going to show this right now, but we're not going to go actually into details. We started like gathering tutorials from the community on how to go to the next level with the Graph, how to deploy subgraphs, how to write unit tests. This is super important. If you're a developer and you want to be confident that what you're doing actually is like solid and robust, you need to write unit tests, and there's like better tooling every month on this. So again, have a look at this. It's on Learn. And if you look at the Pathway, it will take you to the GitHub page of our Pathway. I've already cloned everything because I don't want to like waste too much time on this. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's this app. I should be able to split my screen. You should be able to see all of this with my terminal.
Hey, I think your audio went out. At least it did for me.
How long did it go out for? Is it better now? Can you hear me? Oh.
Never mind. I think that was an issue on mine.
Oh, that was just an issue? Okay, yeah, I think it was just an issue on yours.
I think you were breaking up a little bit, and then yeah, never mind.
Okay, cool. Okay, it seems like, yeah, it was maybe on your end. So basically what I just said is I just sort of walked through learn.figment.io and sort of the whole page we have for the Graph. We have created resources with like podcasts, Twitter threads, and all that stuff. And then we have the Pathway. And the Pathway is this Next.js app that we use as our educational playground. We've built little apps for Solana, Avalanche, Polygon, Polkadot, Tezos, Secret, Near, and we just added the Graph and Ceramic this week. And we're basically going to go through the whole thing with for the Graph. And so it's really, I think really what we want to convey here is that layer one smart contract chains are just one part of the equation. If you're a Web2 developer and you want to build like an app, you need a backend framework, you need a front-end framework like React or Vue or whatever. You need, like probably a few different type of databases. You'll probably have like a Postgres database, an Elasticsearch index, et cetera, right? You'll use OAuth for identity, etc. And so all of those are basically your stack. And the layer ones are really just one part of the equation. Like data indexing is crucial. We're going to go over this. Identity and storage with Arweave or Ceramic are also super important, and we're really going to demo this one today. The pathways. Let's get right into it if that's cool. Okay. The pathways are basically those like apps that we've built, and for the graph, we have like 7 steps, and we're going to go from nothing at all to having a leaderboard for CryptoPunks. And so that's like what our little app is going to be today. We're going to build basically a little UI that shows the 10 most valuable CryptoPunks in history. Okay. And so we've decomposed this in like a bunch of different steps. The first one is, well, we have to always start with running a graph node. We had a conversation about this actually like last week, and I think there's like 2 different ways. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's 2 different ways to do this. Either you run your local node, and you'll need Docker, and you'll need basically like a whole container that can support IPFS, Postgres, and GraphQL, or you do it on the Graph Studio. Is that correct? Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, that's right. I'm sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways. Well, actually, I guess when you really think about it, there's like 3 ways, because we still have the hosted service. So you can basically deploy to the hosted service, you can deploy to the decentralized network, or you can run your own graph node.
Okay. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to actually run this locally. And so I already have on this side of my screen in this terminal this Docker image, this Docker container that's running. You can see if you clone this repo that I'm working off here, we have a Docker compose file. I'm not a specialist, so I'm not going to pretend like I understand everything, but basically we need 3 main components, 3 main services in our image. We need a graph node, which is going to be listening to Ethereum and running the graph client. And then we need an IPFS cluster, which we're going to use, I think, when we deploy our subgraph. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then we need a Postgres database, because once we take all those events from Ethereum and we process them and we map them onto what we call entities, we're going to store this in a Postgres database. And so this takes quite a bit of time, so I sort of went ahead and did that, but we have our Docker running right here, okay? And so in the pathway, you'll see that like every single step has sort of a validation. In this case, everything is already running, so like boom, you get the confettis, everything is great. And we have our Docker, which is running on port 8020, and this is going to get super useful later. So the next step after this is building a scaffold. And the best analogy that came to mind, I don't know how you feel about that one, but when you want to start like basically any JavaScript app, you can start from scratch from an empty folder and create like a package JSON, and then if you have npm, you can install dependencies, or you can just do git init, or npm init, I think, and npm init is going to create like the package JSON. Is going to ask you for a bunch of prompts that are going to fill in this like package JSON with the repo, with the name, with the version, etc. And it's going to create sort of a template for your JavaScript application. And so I was thinking about the subgraph and sort of the graph init command as the same thing as this like npm init or yarnit, is, you know, like creating a scaffold. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think that's the essence of software development, is that we kind of build better and better abstractions. So instead of having to kind of, you know, write everything from scratch, you can kind of, in this case, start off with something that will get you going and take care of a lot of that initial, you know, boilerplate type of stuff.
Right. So there's like, we've linked here to the Graph CLI. The Graph CLI is the Graph protocol. So it's here. There's a whole documentation on GitHub. Blah, blah, blah. If you go on npm, it links to the GitHub project that should be, actually, where is it? Am I missing it? Usually there's a link right here.
You're looking for the link to the GitHub?
Okay. Yeah, the link to GitHub. Usually it's on the
usually is right
page,
there.
but I couldn't find it. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
there you go.
So we're going to use, yeah, this is the first time actually I don't see the GitHub link. So we're going to use this command to scaffold our subgraph. So you'll see also, for all the developers who are going to go through this pathway, every single step has the same thing. We hide the solution, we try and give you as many hints, and it's up to you to do it. And then we give you a solution in case you can't figure that out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually create our subgraph, and we're going to do it. We've created this folder, subgraph. So first you cd into it, and then we're going to add, we're going to start graph init. I'm going to do backslash. Backslash just enables you to do a multi-line in a terminal. That's it. And there's a bunch of stuff we need to do. So the first thing is we want to tell graph init to not use a prefix. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Because that's something actually that was a little bit confusing to me. When do we need a prefix and when do we don't need a prefix?
For initializing a subgraph,
Yeah.
I've never actually used that command before. I'm
Okay.
assuming that since you're doing something with the local graph node, it might have something to do with that. But I've actually
Yes.
never needed to use that.
Okay, cool. Well, we're both discovering something then. I felt like the simple, if I didn't put it, it would basically ask me if I want to sort of put a scope at the beginning of my subgraph. And I assumed the scope would be useful when I want to deploy it to the studio. But when I'm doing it locally, I basically don't need a scope. I don't need like, to put the GitHub organization in the subgraph name. But again, maybe we'll come back to that. So the second thing we need to do is we need to set the contract address. So in this case, we're going to work, the smart contract we're going to work with is the CryptoPunk contract. So you can see it on Etherscan. It's at this address right here. It's also in the URL. So I'm going to take this address, and I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to add that data here. Then the next command we need is we want to set the Ethereum network to mainnet. I think that we can just do network and then mainnet backslash, and then we want to tell the subgraph to index contract. Oh, one thing actually I did in demo, and I think this is really important, is the CLI has a help. And I think for like people who are new to the CLI, like me, or like basically anybody who has never done it, I think you can just do graph init and then do -- help. Is that the command?
Yeah, you can just say graph. You can just even type in graph or graph. Yeah, dash help.
So that's actually really cool. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say for another thing, I guess, to keep in mind that's interesting is that like if you don't know all of these prefixes that you're passing in, you can just actually type graph init and it will prompt you for all of these as well, which is kind of nice.
Cool.
Let's say that you're getting started and you don't know all of these different prefixes. Just running graph init, and it'll kind of walk you through all the steps and ask you what you need, and it'll take care of all of it for you. But it is actually nice to be able to just define everything in one command. I usually just copy and paste a command that I have saved, and then it just kind of like I just plug in my Ethereum address, maybe the network, and then from there everything is good to go.
So let's do it. You know what? I think it would be useful to do it both ways. Like we're going to do it with the graph init by passing everything in the command, and then we'll do it using the prompts that are sort of baked in the graph init command. Okay. So in this case, I just basically I basically linked my subgraph with the Docker container by telling him where to find it when they want to deploy it. And then I'm going to name my subgraph punks. And I think that should be it. I think I've conveyed every single of those 6 lines here. So let me go and type enter and see what happens if I do this. So actually we get best of both worlds with this, because it's still doing the prompts, but it's actually it's like putting defaults, sort of like when you have an HTML input and there's a placeholder. So it's using the values that I passed here as placeholder for the prompts. So this one is coming from this line. I'm going to highlight it. So I'm going to press enter. Directory to create subgraph. I think it's also coming from punks. It's just sort of assuming I want to create the directory with the name. Mainnet, again, it's by default using mainnet, but I could use like, Polygon Mumbai or Avalanche Fuji, which is the testnet, etc. I'm going to use mainnet. Contract name, same thing. It's pre-filling it with the contract I passed. And contract name. And I think we talked about this earlier. This one is really interesting. It's something I learned a few days ago. The contract name here, if I don't pass anything, if I go in Visual Studio and if I go in Subgraph, I see that now I have a folder called punks. And if we look at this folder, it has a bunch of stuff, and we're going to go through like everything. But the most important one, I think, is the YAML, because this is what we call the manifest. And there's, if you remember, there was the contract name here. Contract is basically goes here. And if I wanted to call this like
maybe
anything,
zoom in a little bit. I think.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's hard.
Yeah,
for
thanks.
you.
That's exactly what I needed actually. You to tell me. Yeah, perfect. Is that better?
Maybe slightly more even.
Oh really? Oh wow. Okay, this is huge for me. I'm gonna have to scroll
or maybe
a lot.
it's just my screen, but maybe if anyone that, okay, that's better. I'm
better?
curious if
Okay.
anyone in the chat has any other.
Yeah, let us know. Let us know.
If it looks good for them as well. That looks much better. Yeah.
But in my manifest, and we're going to talk about the manifest in like 2 minutes, but there's this field called ABIs, and this is where the contract name goes. So in this case, I didn't set anything, so it's going to be the default contract, right? So it's
Yeah,
sort of
and some of the smart contracts have multiple, I would say, contracts within them, or some of the deployments have multiple contracts. So for instance, a marketplace might have a token in a marketplace, and you only want to kind of like index the events from one or the other, so you can kind of choose that.
Cool. Okay, so basically this is the solution. We're pretty close, I think, given what we entered. And so then you'll see we explain every single command, and we should even show you a little animated GIF just to make sure, like, to get something basically to check that what you did is right. And so you can then click the subgraph scaffold button to see if that worked. And then because you did that and it's fine, you can go to the next step. And so the next step is going to be tweaking this manifest. So we already looked at this. The manifest is the file called subgraph.yaml. YAML is like JSON or XML. It's like a way to structure data as text. And I want to spend like a minute or two with you just sort of like looking at the anatomy of this YAML file, because there's actually a lot of things that are like, that we can really see from, let me try and like make this a little bit bigger. So this address, that's from the contract we passed. There's 4 instances of contract. This is from the contract name, which we sort of defaulted to contract. But there's some things that are really interesting. It's sort of, where are those guys coming from? And where are those guys coming from? Can you tell us more?
Yeah, totally. So with GraphQL and with how a subgraph is architected, I guess you could say, there are this idea of entities. And when you query for data, you're essentially defining in that entities field the data types that you'd like to have available. So for instance, when you think of like an NFT marketplace, which is a really easy, I think, thing for people to visualize, because maybe they've interacted with something like OpenSea, you might see a list of tokens when you kind of land on the site. Now, each of those tokens would, theoretically be an entity, and that entity would be defined here, but it would also map directly to your data model, which in GraphQL land would be in a GraphQL schema. And a GraphQL schema will hold a one-to-one mapping between the entities defined here and the entities defined in the GraphQL schema. And then within, an entity, you could think of an entity almost as like a map or an object, or a type or a class.
Or a model? Is it like for people
of a class? But yeah.
For example, like coming from Web 2, I've done a lot of Ruby on Rails in my career, and so I'm thinking about this as like a model. Is that also kind of, like,
I think that makes sense.
Like in the MVC
a data model.
parroting?
It's been a while since I've used Rails with that.
But you know what I mean? It's more about the abstraction of like MVC and any MVC framework. Like if you guys have done Django with Python or Ruby on Rails or anything, M is like the model. It's like basically the interface between your database and the rest of the world, right? And so for me, this is really what the entities are. And then the handlers feel more like the controller, like basically what happens and how to process data to make any shape of data fit into what our data model is expecting, right? So I don't know, maybe that's a metaphor that can take us, only so far, but I think it's probably a good approximation for people who are starting. but yeah, as you explained, those entities here, they're pre-filled. And what I realized actually is that they're pre-filled directly from the event. So on the right of my screen, I pulled up the contract from the CryptoPunk contract, right? And so if you look in this, I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit. I think it's line 53 in this contract, which is now like a few years old. But there's like all those events. And actually you see the entities are mapped one-on-one. And this is happening because when we initialized our scaffold, we actually passed index events. And this basically tells the Graph CLI to pull the events and then grab whatever is the name of the event and put it right here under the entities. And then also in the event handlers, take those events, put them, basically create one event handler for each. And then my guess is the handle assign is probably just a convention that grabs like the name of the event and adds handle in front of it. That's the only explanation I could find. Yeah, okay, exactly. And then you can also see that the signature of our event in the smart contract is basically going to be, by convention, it's going to become the signature of the event handler. And we'll get back to that. But I just really want to
and then the Graph CLI will, like the Graph CLI will actually create types based on the arguments there, so you can have a typed interface when you're writing the code for your handlers.
Cool.
Which is pretty nice.
So what we're gonna do a few things here to go to the next step. The first thing is, in terms of entities, we actually are not interested in everything. Here, the only thing we want are like the CryptoPunks and the accounts that hold them. And then for the event handlers, we just want the event punk bot, which is here. So I'm going to delete everything else because we really don't need everything else here. Okay. And then we need a start block. And the way I understand the start block is that once we start sort of like unleashing this Kraken, which is the subgraph on our node, we don't want this subgraph to index the whole history of Ethereum, because this, like, there, I don't know, like billions of transactions at this point, maybe tens of billions. So this would take a ton of time, and B, way too much space in our Postgres database. So we want to basically define a start date, well, not a date, but a block, since blocks are like time. And so under sources, I think we can say start block equals, and this is going to be the Ethereum block we want to start indexing at. Is that correct?
That is right. Yeah. So when you define start block, it'll just start at that block and
so
start indexing.
Yeah, and if I think if on Etherscan, if you just type a number, it finds the block by default, and so we can see that we're going to start 48 days ago. Okay. So now that we have set up our subgraph, let's check to make sure that our app accepts the new manifest. And it has. So now it allows us to go to the next step. So now we have this manifest, which is sort of like our conductor. That's also now the metaphor that I sort of came up with, which is like the subgraph is like an orchestra. And there's, the violins are like the schema and the entities. And then, maybe there's a bunch of other instruments, which are like the mappings, et cetera. And you need one person in the middle to make sure that everybody's in sync. Everybody sort of agrees on what the contracts are. And that's the conductor. And the conductor is basically our manifest. So maybe, again, I like metaphors. Maybe this one will carry you guys to a certain point and then you'll outgrow it. But I think it's a good place to start. Cool. So now we've defined our entities, and the next step is going to be to actually define those entities. And the place we do this is in the file which is just above subgraph YAML. It's called schema.graphql. I'm going to, again, because we passed index events, it's sort of like, it's been smart and it created a bunch of entities. I'm going to delete everything. And I'm going to create just two entities for the one we want, which is account and punks, which are the two that we define here. And the relationship here is really easy. It's a one-to-many relationship. And the thing now is an account is going to have an ID. Punk is also going to have an ID, an index, which is going to be sort of the, the number of that punk, a value, a date. But then that's where it gets really interesting, is we have to define this relationship between those two. Every framework has a different way to do this. And this is basically going to be, we're going to explain this with GraphQL syntax, right? I'm not, to be honest, I never really worked a lot with GraphQL, so I had to do a lot of research on this. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more on this, but the first one is that here we have to specify that an account has many punks. And so the way we do this is we create this basically array to tell the code that it's a list of punks, and then we put this bang here. And this is how we say an account has many punks. Is that correct?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, with the GraphQL schema, you're basically having a type, and the type would be very similar to like use TypeScript or any type programming language. It's pretty much the same.
Right. So if it was TypeScript, it would be like, it would say like something. Oh, sorry. It would say like punk like this. But in GraphQL, you actually put the array syntax around it. And so what is the exclamation mark here?
Exclamation mark means it is non-nullable, or that it is a required field. So if you try to index this GraphQL schema and this subgraph, and you save an entity to your graph node, and you don't include one of the required fields, then it will error out. So like if you have certain fields that may not be filled out, they might be null, then you can just leave the exclamation point off and everything should be fine.
Okay, cool. So again, for those who know TypeScript, because I feel like so many people know TypeScript now, this line 6 is the equivalent of this one in line 5, the way you would define like a type like this. And if there was no bang, it would be the equivalent of basically adding a question mark. But again, those syntaxes are different, and so that's how you do it in GraphQL. So all this file, basically, this has nothing to do with the graph. This is really just, we're 100% in GraphQL land, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there is one difference is where we have that @entity directive, and that is something that the Graph CLI and the Graph, I would say the Graph CLI understands how to kind of use and build. When you run graph build or graph deploy, it's going to kind of understand how to take that and build a subgraph that you can then deploy by implementing, by basically letting the graph node know that this is an entity and we want to index it. And it's going to has a lot to do with the subgraph manifest. Okay, so in our case here, we have this one-to-many relationship, but this relationship goes both ways, right? The one-to-many is also many-to-one. So we need to define the relationship at two places. In the account, we basically say one account has many punks, and then for the punk, we want to say a punk belongs to one owner. And I think the way you do this is that you do account bang here, but then you have to, is this where you add the directive derived from, or do you actually add it on the one side? You don't need the directive on both sides. Okay. Let me pull up an example that I have right here. I think I have the link to your article. Oh no, I didn't put it here actually. But yeah, if you have a link. Yeah, so it looks like the one-to-one relationship of owner to account doesn't need a directive, but for the array you need the derived from directive. So it's you do derived from, and then you have to pass, and then you have to pass something to derive from, right? Yeah, it would be basically the field from the ID that you want to derive that entity from. So in this case, it would probably be the ID or the ID or the owner. Let me see. Okay. So I think it's going to be like this. I mean, I have the solution, so I'm going to cheat a little bit. Okay, yeah, let's check that out. I haven't looked at this. Yeah, exactly. So let's just cheat there. I think I might need to put like double quotes, and there's no object. Again, I come from JavaScript, TypeScript, so I'm sort of always putting like those curly braces, but here we don't need. And so this is going to basically complete the one-to-many relationship between the accounts and the punks. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to run CodeGen. So CodeGen is really, really important. I'm going to sort of demo this, and I'm going to try and demo this in an interactive way where I'm going to put the code on the right, and I'm going to put my terminal on the left. And so now we've created and we saved this GraphQL, the definitions of our two entities, and I'm going to go in subgraph. I'm going to cd in the subgraph, and I'm going to yarn CodeGen. And I want you guys to pay attention to what's happening. I think it's happening in generated. If we look at,
contract. Where is it actually going to generate this code? Like when we run yarn codegen?
It should go in that generated folder exactly where you're looking at.
Right. And so what's now this is the schema. I think in the contract, yeah, we can see that now we have we should have a bunch of types. Then maybe at the end, there's so much code generated.
They should map pretty close to the GraphQL, to the schema.graphql.
Right. So it's so zoomed in for me. So apologies if I'm scrolling a lot. It's really it's a little bit hard for me to follow, but if it's easy for you, it's good. Okay. So see, now we have this Punk class, which is now a purely TypeScript class. And it has an ID, an index, an owner, a value, and a date. And those are basically exactly this TypeScript compiled version of what we define here in our entity. And this is what CodeGen is going to do. CodeGen is going to simplify your life so that you basically write 18 lines, and it figures out a way to create like all those classes and ways for them to interact, like basically an interface with the database. And we're going to get back to this, but you can save an object from TypeScript to the database, to the store, and you can load an object from the database. And in the next step, we're going to start using those save and those load functions, okay? But remember, yarn codegen is going to create all this code inside the generated folder.
Yeah, it gives you a way to not only interact with the graph node, but you can also interact with the contract itself. So if you need to make a contract call to kind of get any metadata or any data at all that is available in that contract or any contract really, you can actually call from within the mapping using some of that generated code. And then the last thing is that it uses the types. It uses the ABI to give you types as well, so you can kind of understand the data that's coming in to the arguments and in the mapping, and kind of have type safety there, which is pretty nice.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah. So again, that's something, ABIs is a concept that's a little bit new to me. So but I realized that if you go on Etherscan on the actual page of the CryptoPunk contract, you have the code, but then you realize like almost at the same level as the code, you have the ABIs. And that sort of tells you something about how important they are. The ABIs are basically, it sounds like API, and for a reason, right? Because it is the interface, it's the contract. It tells you, if you use this shape to interact with me, I will listen to what you have to say, and I will return some data. So it's like really critical to import them. And I think importing them is something that happens when you enter like the contract address and the network in the graph init function that we did earlier. This is when it imports the ABIs and puts them in. I think it puts them in this folder here, right? It basically imported them, and you can see that this has all the interface. It tells you can call this function, you have to pass a bunch of inputs, this is the name of the input, this is the type. It's just like on a JSON form, but it's like the interface to our contract. Cool, so now we have our entities, we generated this, so now we have all our TypeScript code. The last thing we have to do, well, there's two more things we have to do, but in terms of configuration, before we start consuming this subgraph, is we need to implement the mappings. And if you remember, I'm going to now put back the code on the left of my screen. Whoop. We had in our manifest, so basically we just did that part, and now we have to do this part, which is once our subgraph and our node, when they listen to new or even like old Ethereum events while they're scanning, but when they receive any sort of events, they need sort of a manual to know what to do with that event and how to go from the input to the output. The input being an Ethereum event, and the output being a TypeScript object that can be saved in Postgres. Does that sort of make sense? Like to explain what a mapping is?
That's exactly right. You use those mappings to handle those events. They fire the function. You can then talk to either the graph node or the contract itself.
Okay, cool.
And you can also talk to IPFS. That's the other thing that you can do as well. Okay,
great. So I'm going to skip directly to the challenge. Then we're going to sort of like explain all the code. So this is the code for mapping. We sort of give you half of it, and then we're going to implement the second half together. This happens whenever we find an event emitted by the contract. So basically, the contract will emit this event whenever a transaction happens, and that's what we care about. The first thing we need to do is we want to load this event. This load, if you remember, it's coming from, I think, the TypeScript generated contract. So it's at the very bottom. They should be, or no, it's in the schema. Schema.cs? Yeah, it's here. So in our class account that was generated with the codegen, there's a function called load, which is going to use the store, which in this case is the database, and get the account from the ID. This is, I mean, if you've done any work on any MVC framework, this is, again, I'm using like Rails, but this is the same thing in active record when you're just going to find something through like an index, right? This is your model. This is the function on the active record, and this is the index. So this is sort of the same thing. And here we use like the address from the params that we get from the event. So this is how we basically pull the account from the database. If it doesn't exist, we create it. But again, we're only creating the instance. We haven't actually saved it. We haven't persisted it at this point. And then we assign it an ID, a bunch of fields, and then we save it. And it's only at this point that the transaction is going to be committed in the database. But that's only one part because we need to do two things. We need to write in the account table, but we also need to write in the punk table. So that's the stuff we're going to do here. So again, I'm going to try and do this. And so Nader, let me know if there's anything I do that's wrong, because this is like, again, really new to me. So I'm going to try and like just swing it. Okay, so we need to basically first see if there's a punk in memory and like persisted. So we're going to try and load it. And we need to get the events. And the event has a bunch of params. So I can see like Visual Studio is doing autocomplete. I need to get the punk index, I think, and then I'm going to transform it to a string. This is going to, basically, I'm going to put it right under this. So I basically just did this. Find the punk using the hex string found in the event. Cool. If there's none, so if punk equals null, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. Let's just do double equal null. We need to create it. So we're going to say punk equals new punk. And we have to pass, we want to pass this, we want to initialize it with this index. And then we're going to set ID and index. So I actually don't even know if we need to do ID because we pass the ID here. Do you know this actually? Do we need to do this line, or is this sort of already setting the ID?
I believe the ID will already be set.
Right. Okay, so I'm just gonna, like, for you guys watching and, like looking at me, a sort of semi-noob, maybe this line is not needed. And it actually wouldn't hurt because you would just be overriding the value ID with the same ID. So it's not gonna hurt, but it might just be overkill. And then for the index, we're gonna pass this, but we're not gonna convert that to a hex string. And then we're going to set, we need to set the owner. So the owner, the owner is coming from our event. And the params, there should be, actually, I don't remember where the owner is. No, event, params dot.
It'll either be the to address or the from.
Oh, it's the to address. Absolutely. Yeah, it's the to address. Exactly. But there's an error here. Oh, because this is an address type, and I have to convert it to its string. So I have to do to hex string. To be very honest, also, there's a function called toString, and I'm not sure which one to use. But I've always been using to hex string. Do you know the difference between the two?
I've been using to hex string too, and I don't know the difference now.
Okay, there we go.
I think this is maybe. I'm wondering if this is like assembly script stuff. That's stuff I'm still learning is the assembly script. It's slightly close to TypeScript, but not exactly.
Yeah. So the last thing we need is the date, and the date, we're not going to grab it from the params. There's actually another sort of attribute that's by default in every event, and it's the block. And the block has a timestamp. And here we go. And the last thing we got to do is all this basically does nothing unless we persist our punk to the storage. So that's what we do with punk.save. Okay. I think this looks good. Sorry for all the comments. I like to comment my code. I think it's useful when you learn, to keep sort of the scaffold and the little wheels on the bike, to keep them on. Sometimes it reminds me, like months later, when I go and revisit my own code, why I did things, one way or another. So yeah, I don't know. Are you the same? You like to leave comments on the code? Okay, so now that we have our entities, we know how we can save events to Postgres. We have to run those two commands. We are going to do yarn create local, and we're going to look at the output. So what it did is it created the subgraph, and you can see here on my Docker logs that it says received subgraph create. So it's like now we've registered our subgraph with our graph node, which is running in our Docker container. And now we're going to sort of like press the on button. We're going to say, okay, we're going to unleash our graph, and it's going to start doing a bunch of stuff. So on the left side, I'm going to actually clear my Docker image, because you guys are going to start seeing a lot of logs, and I really want to make sure all this is like really visible. Okay, I'm going to do yarn deploy local. Let's go. So version label, I'm just going to hit enter because I'm not really sure what version. I don't feel like I want to specify one, so I'll let the Graph CLI figure that out. So it uploaded the subgraph to my local IPFS, and there's a ton of stuff on the left. I'm not going to go through all of it, but there's a bunch of stuff. And Nader, feel free to like let me know if there's anything else you feel like people should understand. The one that are really important to me are the scanning. The scanning is, and there's one thing I just want to point out before I let you keep going, is there's a block in the scanning, and you can see the first scanning is actually this 131 with a bunch of zeros. And if you remember, this is the number that I actually put in the start block. So I basically told the graph node start, but only here, and it's grabbing the blocks. I think like this one, it took 1, but then it sort of took 10, and then it sort of exponentially starts like indexing more blocks, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things to note is that like there's some default logging, but there's also a log utility that you can log in your subgraph mapping templates.
Okay. Where can I find this? Oh, I can't hear you. You might be muted because I see you move, but I cannot hear you. Yeah, you're muted. Can you hear me? Just not if you hear me. Okay, because I cannot hear you, and the toggle mic icon is red, so I think you might be muted. Can you try and unmute it through? Oh, really? Okay, you might have. That's crazy. Do you want to refresh then? Let's just take a minute to figure that out. Okay, so while Nader is like figuring that out, I just want to mention that. So we saw the scanning. So I'm going to look for scanning here. This is like, those are the logs of the Docker image of where the graph node is running. So there's a bunch of scans. You can see them. Like I'm just searching for scans. Like there's a ton of them. You can see like the yellow little like lines here on the side of my terminal. And then there's a bunch of other ones called sync. And sync is different because sync is basically all the ones that happened after the moment I started running my subgraph. So those are sort of all in the future. And so if I clear, we're going to start seeing syncing like logs, because whenever there's a new block that's being persisted on the Ethereum blockchain, my graph node is going to be listening to it, and boom, it's sync. And you can see the head. This is the actual like the last block on Ethereum. Like if I go on Etherscan and I look at the last block, I'm not sure where it is. Actually, yeah, if I like search for the block, this one was 45 seconds ago. This one, boom, This one was like probably like, I'll say like 15 seconds ago, 21. So my point is like we're live in sync with the Ethereum mainnet blockchain. Nader, are you back? And
Yeah. I don't know what happened. That was strange. It just
Cool.
would not let me unmute.
Good.
The only thing I was commenting was that when I first started developing subgraphs, I didn't realize that there was like a logging utility that was built into the Graph TypeScript library, which is something that the Graph team maintains. And you can basically just import the log, and we have a handful of different types of logs. And they are great because you can log out certain types of information. So you can debug, you can error, you can do things like that. And they show up in different areas in the Graph dashboard when you're kind of using the hosted service or you're using the decentralized network or the Graph Subgraph Studio, but they also show up locally if you're doing that. So if you're getting errors when you're trying to deploy and you can't figure it out, a great way to debug is just to import the logging utility and start logging out stuff just like you typically would in any of your applications.
Cool, that's awesome. Can you drop a link maybe
Sure.
so we can add this to the pathway? And yeah, I mean, if you guys are listening and you've been developing on absolutely anything, you know how important it is to have logs. It's important when this is the happy path. Like we're showing you what happens if everything goes well. But to get there, we had to like spend hours trying to figure that out. So without logging, like you're basically blind and there's nothing, you're driving blind. So there's nothing you can do. And you'll have accidents. You'll deploy code that won't work in prod. So at this point, we have our subgraph running on our graph node, which is locally like listening to Ethereum in our Docker container. And every time there's a node, it basically knows, it basically figures out if any events that we're listening to has been emitted from the smart contract, and then it persists stuff in our Postgres database. We have 5 minutes left, and we're basically going to finish with like a bunch of UI and GraphQL because we're basically almost there. Right now, at this point, we have the data. We just need to query it and display it. I'm new to GraphQL too, but there's something that I think is really, really amazing is every GraphQL Polo-like client comes shipped with this GraphQL interface, which is sort of a playground for you to sort of like test and run queries against your Postgres database. So we have this one, which is sort of preloaded. And if you hit play here, we can see that we have stuff in our database. We're just retrieving the IDs here. And I don't want to do a whole course on my GraphQL because I'm a noob, you're a specialist, and we have 5 minutes and it's like not enough time. But I'm basically going to start like writing a little bit more of this. So I'm going to go to the last step of the tutorial of this pathway. And we're going to try and get the 10 most expensive CryptoPunks. So we need ID, index, value, and dates.
I'm not sure if the right screen is not showing up for anyone else, but I'm seeing it says you are screen sharing. Is there a different screen we should be seeing?
I don't know actually. If anybody can if somebody who's having the same problem or not having the same problem can drop a line in the chat, then we would know. But I can try stop sharing and sharing again. I don't know if I can do this actually. Can't see the screen.
It says you are screen sharing. Is that the screen we're supposed to be seeing?
We see the same. Okay, let me stop. Oh, okay. And let me share my screen again. Technical difficulties. Huh? Okay. Can you guys see now the pathway?
There we go, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. So I was saying there's this GraphQL interface. Yeah, now you see it, right? And so this comes, by the way, when you deploy local, when you run deploy local, you see it says deploy to, and it gives you this URL. You can do option click, and it will open it. So I'm gonna try and query index value dates. So index value. Oh, I thought it would go to the next step. And dates. Okay, so now I'm gonna hit play. Boom. It actually grabbed all those things, and then the next thing I want to do is I want to try and get the 10 most expensive. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to first have to sort them. So I think I can do order by. I need to do order by value. Then I put a comma to add another sort of directive. I'm going to do order direction. I need to do descending. And then I need to do, I'm going to do filter. No, I want to get the first. So it's like first, and I'm going to do 10, right? I think that, is this a valid? No, here. What is wrong with my syntax? Do you know? Can you see my syntax? Order by value. Do I need to?
Can you zoom in a tiny bit?
Yeah, of course. Sorry. Okay. Order by value. Order direction. Oh, I need to do column. Yeah. Order by column descending. No need for quotes or anything. This is a sort of a primitive of GraphQL, and then first 10. So if I do this, I should get the 10. I should basically sort them by value, the highest first, and then just get and chop everything that's under 10. And this didn't work. Why? Order by value. The value is still 0. You know what? We have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to cheat. I'm going to look at the solution. And I think it's order by. I just really want to get the UI like running. So I'm going to show you. Okay, so this should be the query. Okay, value is 0. We did something wrong, I guess, in maybe when we in the previous step for the mappings, maybe we're not saving the value. I'm just realizing that now. Oh, you know what, params? In our mappings. Oh, I forgot to save the value.
Oh, okay.
Okay, this is really cool. I didn't even do that on purpose, but that's great. So you guys can see that when we here, all the values are equal to 0. So I have to go back here and I have to say events dot params dot value. Okay, and if I make a change here, I'm going to have to run.
That's a nullable field.
It's what? Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. So I'm going to remove local. So I'm going to stop this subgraph which is running. And then I'm going to recreate a new one using those new mappings that I've saved. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to do create local. And then I'm going to do deploy local. And this is going to basically start like a new subgraph, and it's going to reindex everything. And I'm going to go back here. And my guess is it might take a minute to like start indexing. But I should be able now to rerun this. Yep, now I have values. Cool. So I have only 5 because when I hit play, there were only 5 CryptoPunks, but now I have 10. So now we're good. So now we can go. We can take this query, and we can put it inside our React code, which is going to be in protocols, the GraphQL query. Okay, because we basically use the playground to figure that out. Make sure it's working, and now we're going to take it and we're going to actually run the subgraph, and it should show us the 10 highest CryptoPunk. And oh, it refreshed because I made a change. Okay, it's refreshing the UI, and then I'm going to hit the button again. Loading. Everything is slow, probably because Docker is like indexing a ton of stuff. Yeah, Docker is like probably taking everything from my computer right now. Let me start this again. Anything that I've missed on the mappings? It's kind of cool actually that there was this error because I didn't actually catch it. Nobody caught it. So it's really cool that we got to see what it takes to find an error, stop a subgraph, regenerate the build, and then redeploy this build to sort of. It's the same thing as like making a change and like hot reloading almost our subgraph, right? Oh, you're muted. No, yeah, you're fine.
Yeah. No, it is cool to be live coding and catch a bug. At least it wasn't one of the bugs that kind of brought down the entire app, anything like that.
No, I mean, hey, like let's not speak too soon because I'm not able to restart on my Next.js app because like Docker is is just really killing my my computer. Okay, but
yeah, there we go. It's like, well, maybe not. No, either way, like I guess if someone wants to kind of get started, though, this is a new part of Figment Learn, and anyone can kind of go and follow the steps that we just went through, right? They should be able to copy and paste. Everything is there, and it should kind of work just kind of how we did here.
Yeah. So this is taking like really a long time, and so I don't know, it might take a minute to get back. So let's wrap it up, and then if I'm able to get like the actual UI running, we can just do the last step at the very end. The whole thing we're trying to really demo here, and we're trying to like the mental model we're trying to create is creating. Oh, it worked. Okay. As soon as Docker ended, like it's like, oh yeah, cool. Like now Yarn now is like, yeah, it's fine. Next.js can do it. But the whole idea is like with this pathway, we're trying to create a way for developers to like figure out step by step how to like really print the new mental models of decentralized protocol and about a decentralized protocol like the graph, and really like sort of min this in their heads. You know, what a manifest is, what the entities are, how you define mappings, how you deploy, you know, debug, how you like stop a subgraph from running, how you like compile it, redeploy it, and like finally run a GraphQL query. So we've done this for like the graph, and we've tried to do something that's like really like step by step, you know, with like a really smooth flow to try and like explain things step by step. We have this for like a bunch of other things, like Solana. We have this for Ceramic if you understand how to add. I know actually, Nader, you did like a really cool video on how to add Ceramic to an Xjs app also, right?
Yeah, Ceramic I've looked into, really interested in kind of Ceramic and IDX, and also with Solana I did a tutorial that's now on their documentation, and I'm actually working on a video as well for Free Code Camp.
Cool, great. So yeah, we have like a pathway now for Ceramic. We have a pathway for Solana if you want to learn Solana. We have Polygon, Avalanche, Near, really like trying to build like all those things together. Is there anything else, Nader? Because I know we're out of time. And is there anything else you want to mention?
I mean,
like
I think that if anyone's interested in learning more, definitely about the graph, check out the graph blog, check out the graph docs, check out our YouTube channel. Also, if you're interested in Web3, just check out the Figment Learn. All their other paths are all really great. I think they're great intros. And yeah, that's it for me. I do have to jump off though, I think.
Yeah. Thanks for your time. Let us know. We have a Discord, so let us know if there's anything else you guys want to chat about. And yeah, like thanks so much for your time, Nader, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
It was a pleasure to be here, and thanks for everyone that came through and checked this out. Cool. And reach out to us if you have any questions.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.